terrific. I really appreciate you all being here. Just a 30-second background on me. I'm a physician scientist by training. My PhD is in immunology. I was going down the path of being an academic scientist. I'm an ophthalmologist by training. And then took a detour and went into the world of startups. The first one that I did was in healthcare IT, a way to motivate people to remember to take their medications on time. The second one ended up being a medical aesthetic company for a cream to reduce fat underneath the eyelid. And then the third one was a cell and gene therapy company for a CAR-T, chimeric antigen receptor T-cell company for autoimmune diseases. So the first two we sold. The third one we actually took public through a reverse merger a couple of years ago. That one is still going. It's up in Frederick. It's called Cartesian Therapeutics. And over the last, so I'm no longer doing the day-to-day management. I am on the board. I chair the STC, the Science Technology Committee, but I don't do the day-to-day management. And so over the last year and a half, 2 years, I've been sort of putting together the observations in 30 years of medicine and research and sort of startups into what comes next. And so I want to share with you today some of the thoughts that have sort of accumulated over the years. These days, I actually go into a one-person company at the Research Innovation Center in DC, where the Children's Hospital is the old Armed Forces Institute of Pathology at J-Labs, Johnson & Johnson's J-Labs. So Rachel from J-Labs was kind enough to give me a bench, and I go and I do my experiments in cancer therapy, and have met some wonderful colleagues there, and a lot of these ideas were actually born from those experiences as well. So a lot of what I'm going to say could be controversial. It could evoke some strong emotions in you. So feel free to tell me about them, and we can get a conversation going. I know we're not going to have a lot of time within this format, but maybe afterwards, because these ideas are kind of still forming. And really, I want to make 5 observations and maybe areas to dive into. The first, and we'll shift gears a little bit from Shavini into therapeutics, so less on device and diagnostics and tools and services, but a little bit more emphasis on therapeutics, so biotech, sort of traditional biotech, which are peptides and proteins and biologics and cell and gene therapies and small molecules. And I want to make the observation that US biotech is bloated, that it's slow and expensive in contrast to China, and where Chinese innovation in biotech, I think, is fast and inexpensive, and it's here and it's real. And so if we want to compete, I think we have to go back to our entrepreneurial roots. And the way I think we do that is to adopt a model of apprenticeship and train the next generation of leaders in biotech through a mentor apprenticeship model. And I think the best place to do that is here, greater Washington area, because I think we have all the ingredients needed to serve as a model for the nation of how to build scrappy startup ecosystems. Okay, so we're going to get into some of these. So first, what do I mean by biotech? Innovation is different than invention. So we all know the difference between idea and invention. So everyone has an idea, but invention is how you reduce it to practice. Well, the difference between invention and innovation is that innovation is the process of taking that discovery and into a practical application, as we heard a few minutes ago. So in biotech, it's really the process by which new biological discoveries are translated to actual therapies that benefit patients at scale. And I think that key word at scale is quite important. And in the US, this process is well-defined and very long and very expensive. Traditionally, people talk in terms of a decade or longer, 10 to 15 years to get a drug approved, and hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes even $1 billion or more dollars to start from tens of thousands of possible candidates all the way into a single drug. But it's interesting that the the total amount of capital raised for biotech actually doesn't correlate all that well with the probability of success for any of these drugs. So I picked just one example. You can pick a lot of examples. But this is a company, Kodiak Biosciences, that went through the classic Series A and Series B, Series C, and then ended up going public and doing some follow-on rounds to raise a total of over $300 million. And they spent it all, but they actually did not get any assets tested in phase 2 clinical studies. So the drug was safe. They actually did some phase 1 studies. But for various reasons, they actually were not able to test whether their drug actually worked after spending over $300 million. And these kinds of stories are very common, in particular in the United States. Okay? So I think there's something wrong with this model. These are not technical issues that people encounter, right? I mean, drugs don't work for a lot of reasons, but running out of money to the tune of over $300 million to get to that point is not something we have to keep doing. And I don't think we can keep doing this over the next couple of decades, because we now have biotech innovation from China that's very, very fast and very inexpensive. This is evidenced in part by the fact that the drug pipeline in China is quickly catching up relative to the United States. That's a % share of new drugs in development by companies headquartered in US versus China on the left-hand side. You can see that the clinical trial costs are about 30 to 40% lower in China than the United States, and only some of that difference is because of labor costs. You still have to buy the same material, et cetera, to actually execute. So, and then the time to execute, it's about 60 days shorter to do a phase 1 study there and 180 days shorter to do a phase 2 study there. And the regulatory timeframes are actually quite comparable now. And China has adopted a lot of the international guidelines to ensure a high degree of quality in the drugs that they're currently developing. So it's no surprise that multinational companies, big pharma, now routinely buy assets from China instead of in the United States. And you can see that the relative share of big pharma licensing deals sourced from China has been increasing, in particular over the last several years. And now, as of the end of the first quarter this year, occupies over a third of the total number of deals. And here's some recent examples. These are biobucks dollars on the right, but the upfront payment, the initial payment for these deals is actually quite modest relative to the US. So why, if you're J&J, are you going to be interested in buying an asset for $1 billion from a US company when you can buy a similar asset of the same class from China for a third of the price, right? So this, I think, should raise alarm bells in the United States, because this trend is going to keep going unless we do something about it. So, I think the way we do something about it is actually go back to our entrepreneurial roots, and because we're a nation of scrappy entrepreneurs, it's in our DNA. So there's historical examples I put up here. So, Ben Franklin actually apprenticed as a printer, and he built this printing empire from scratch before he actually sort of became associated as, a founding father of the country. The Wright brothers, they were just bike mechanics, and they bootstrapped their interest in aviation and actually outcompeted much better government-funded rivals along the way. Thomas Edison actually was a newsboy at the age of 13. So these are, so he basically went up and down the train selling newspapers and and food and services. And he was very interested in electricity at the time. He was very interested in the Morse code, the telegraph. But he didn't know how best to educate himself. And he got his break when the station head, a guy by the name of McKinsey, had a 3-year-old son who ended up running into the railroad and was about to get hit. And Edison saw this and saved him. And he ended up getting his break because McKinsey actually offered Edison the opportunity to learn the telegraph. So he worked as a railroad telegrapher. And so he actually apprenticed along the way and learned a skill set that then prepared him to be able to go and start as many inventions and businesses along the way. So we're all he was a hustler and he was an entrepreneur. So we have this in our DNA. We have these modern examples of, Jobs and Wozniak building the Apple in a family garage. We have retail examples. Shavina, I'd like to put you up on this list at this point after hearing your talk. We actually have a local hero I think you're all familiar with Martine Rothblatt, who also was very motivated by her daughter having pulmonary hypertension and developed a drug with a $500,000 seed loan. She never raised any sort of, smart money from professional venture capital. She had 20 employees at the time she went public with United Therapeutics. So we have this, we are gritty. This is how we built the country, okay? So how did we get so bloated in the US? Well, I think we stopped thinking about how best to spend the capital, and we just started totally immersing ourselves with how to raise capital. And so we talk, this golden rule in biotech is raise money where you can get it, not when you need it, right? Everybody talks about this as if it's the spoken word, and they repeat this as a justification for an end to its own self. And I know CEOs who do nothing but raise capital throughout their entire career. And there's entire systems that have been built where you have the investment bankers and delegated authorities to invest your capital through venture capital firms and what have you. So this is what we focus on. And this is what makes headlines, right? Nobody talks about a couple $1 million and being scrappy. Nobody sees that in sort of endpoints or fears or the papers. I can propose another golden rule, right? If you take care of the pennies, the dollars take care of themselves. I think we got to be focusing more on how we best spend the capital and to be able to rebalance these priorities. And I think to do that, we have to train leaders to do more with less. So the current model is a rock star academic comes up with a great invention, and VC finds out about it and floods that venture to the tune of tens of millions of dollars, even when it's preclinical, right? And that capital is used to hire a CEO, usually pulled from the ranks of big pharma, senior VP level person, who then is brought in to do what they've been trained to do, which is to spend that capital to hire a full C-suite. They tend to be relatively risk averse, and so they do a lot of experiments before moving from point A to point B. They spend a lot of money on consultants. They spend a lot of money on themselves. And there are some success stories. After all, I think we have a great biotech industry, but the probability of success is actually still pretty low. So I think as well as that model has worked in the past, I don't think it's going to work so well with the presence of China. And I think what we do need is a different profile of a CEO, more someone like Shavini, okay? So someone who can hire a skeleton crew and grow organically, wear many hats. They're more comfortable with risk because you sort of have to manage scarcity along the way, and your interests are much more aligned with shareholders than they are with the creating a principal agent problem. So in order to do that, I think we have to revisit this, go back to the apprenticeship model, which has worked so well over the course of a millennium. The skill set, skill transfer has been apprenticeship has been the cornerstone of skill transfer since medieval times. It actually dates back even before to the Code of Hammurabi, where artisans were instructed to transfer their skill over. But it wasn't codified and formalized until the medieval guilds, where you developed an apprenticeship journeyman master model. And so this sort of, this three-step process, I think has been repeated. It's actually a great example of convergent evolution, because the same three-step model has taken root not only in Europe, but also in the Ottoman times and in Japan and China relatively simultaneously, okay? And we have modern examples of this with medicine and sort of PhD thesis and legal training. And I think we kind of need this type of fellowship in training the next generation of biotech leaders. And I think there's no better place to do that than Greater Washington, because we have all the ingredients. We have the capital inflow here. We have the world-renowned institutions, and we have the tech and the IP. We've got superb technical talent here. And we also have strong infrastructure. Well, I think what we were missing, though, is that we have a relative shortage compared to Boston, the Bay Area, of repeat founder CEOs that are trained in the scrappy model. And so I think in order to pair them with sort of early career physicians or scientists, you know, one model, and this is the area, and this will be my last slide, is in creating a system of company formation that allows interested, sort of tech-savvy early career physicians or scientists to come and get training as entrepreneurial fellows over a couple of years. Very similar to the historic sort of apprenticeship journeyman master model. So we started this venture studio. It's called SOAR Bio. It's an acronym for Seed, Optimize, Advanced, Repeat. So we're basically creating a portfolio of companies and you know, doing it the way that we've done it in the past, you know, sort of the scrappy entrepreneurship model. So if there's any ask of any of you here, it's to help me identify promising, technically gifted physicians or scientists that are interested in entrepreneurship, but maybe are a little hesitant to sort of get in and sort of do it solo. Because we would be appointing them as chief operating officers of our portfolio companies and growing these companies simultaneously. I think this is one model that could work. I'm sure there's other models that I'd like to get your feedback on. But I think ultimately we can build great companies right here in Greater Washington by rebalancing our priorities and focusing equally on capital allocation efficiency as we do with raising capital, and really compete and win at the world stage. So with that, I'll stop and see if there's any questions.